Hey everyone, welcome back to PEX News. Today we will talk about key questions raised in coverage of Ukraine's drone strikes inside Russia. In the wake of the unprecedented and audacious drone strikes launched by Ukraine deep inside Russian territory, numerous strategic, political, and military questions have surfaced. These inquiries, posed by news reporters, analysts, and commentators, highlight the complexity of this moment in the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war, particularly as peace talks get underway. Below is a full breakdown of the questions raised during the coverage. Before we dive into the topic, we just want to say thank you for your support. If you're enjoying the content, please give the video a like and subscribe to our channel. It truly means a lot to us. Strategic and military implications. So, question number 1, does this strike deal a bigger blow to Russian military pride than to its physical military assets? Answer: yes, in many ways. While the physical loss of strategic assets like Tu-95 bombers and AWACS aircraft is serious, the symbolic and psychological damage may be even greater. These are iconic, high-value military assets often used to project power and deterrence. Their destruction, especially deep within Russian territory, undermines Russia's image of invulnerability and military superiority. It exposes vulnerabilities in its air defense and command systems, shaking domestic and international perceptions of Russian military competence. Question number 2, how significant are the losses of Tu-95 bombers and AWACS aircraft to Russia's war capability? Answer: very significant. Tu-95 bombers are central to Russia's long-range strike capabilities, especially for launching cruise missiles used against Ukraine. They are limited in number and difficult to replace due to their complexity and age. AWACS, Airborne Warning and Control System aircraft, are even more critical. They provide airborne radar, command, and coordination, acting as the eyes and brain of Russian air operations. Losing even one affects situational awareness and operational efficiency, especially during large-scale aerial campaigns. Question number 3, was this operation a form of asymmetric warfare at its finest? Answer: absolutely. Ukraine used lower-cost drones or covert operations to take out high-value, high-cost strategic Russian assets. This is the essence of asymmetric warfare, leveraging innovation, agility, and low-cost methods to impose disproportionate damage on a superior adversary. The psychological, strategic, and tactical impact of this kind of operation far outweighs its cost. Question number 4, could this potentially stop or slow down Russia's war effort if such attacks continue? Answer: yes, if sustained. Repeated successful strikes on strategic assets like bombers, radar planes, and command infrastructure could severely disrupt Russia's ability to conduct coordinated attacks, especially long-range missile strikes. It could force Russia to relocate aircraft farther from the front, stretching logistics and response times. More importantly, it would force Russia to divert resources toward defense rather than offense, potentially slowing operational tempo and degrading war momentum. Question number 5, what does this say about Ukraine's tactical innovation and technological advancement? Answer: it highlights a high degree of adaptability and ingenuity. Ukraine has repeatedly demonstrated an ability to exploit gaps in Russian defenses using homemade drones, modified Western technology, and advanced intelligence coordination. These strikes indicate not just tactical innovation, but also growing capability in long-range precision targeting, cyber reconnaissance, and strategic planning. It showcases a military culture evolving rapidly under pressure, learning, adapting, and innovating. Question number 6. What message does this send to Europe and the US about Ukraine's growing capabilities? Answer: it sends a strong message. Ukraine is not just a passive recipient of aid, but an increasingly sophisticated and capable military actor. These operations validate the effectiveness of Western support and justify continued or increased investment. They also demonstrate Ukraine's ability to impose real costs on Russia, militarily and symbolically, using smart strategies. For NATO and EU partners, it's evidence that Ukraine could one day become not just a security recipient, but a contributor to collective defense innovation. Questions tied to peace talks in Turkey. Question number 1, do these unprecedented Ukraine attacks help, hurt, or have no impact on the direction of peace talks? Answer: they likely have a mixed impact. Ukrainian attacks deep inside Russian territory demonstrate Kyiv's military reach and resilience, which could strengthen Ukraine's leverage in negotiations. However, such actions also provoke Russian nationalistic backlash and may harden Moscow's stance, especially if civilian areas or symbolic targets are hit. The overall impact depends on how each side chooses to frame the attacks, either as a spur for talks or a reason to dig in. Question number 2, will the drone strikes improve Ukraine's negotiating position at the peace table? Answer, to some extent, yes. Demonstrating the capability to strike inside Russia, especially with increasing frequency or precision, helps Ukraine signal that it won't be coerced into unfavorable terms. This could pressurize Moscow into concessions, especially if domestic pressures rise. However, it's a risky strategy. Overplaying this hand could lead to escalation rather than diplomacy. Question number 3, could Russia use the attacks as justification to escalate the conflict, thus stalling talks? Answer, absolutely. The Kremlin has historically used perceived provocations to justify escalations. These attacks could be framed as acts of aggression requiring a proportional or decisive response, allowing Moscow to delay or walk away from talks under the guise of defending sovereignty. This narrative plays well both domestically and with some international partners. Question number 4, given that Ukraine wants a ceasefire and Russia wants to talk about root causes, is this round of talks just political theater? Answer, largely yes, at this stage. If both sides are entering talks with fundamentally different objectives, Kyiv seeking to halt hostilities and preserve territory while Moscow insists on broader ideological or geopolitical revisions, like NATO's role or Ukraine's neutrality, then the talks may serve more to shape international perception than achieve concrete outcomes. It's diplomacy for optics, not necessarily substance, at least for now. Question number 5, is President Putin serious about ending the war, or is this just another delay tactic? Answer, most signs point to a delay tactic. While Putin occasionally signals openness to peace, his core conditions like Ukrainian neutrality, demilitarization, or recognition of annexed territories suggest he's not prepared to compromise meaningfully. Talks may serve as a strategic pause to regroup militarily, relieve sanctions pressure, or divide Western unity, rather than a sincere effort to end the war. Political and diplomatic considerations. Question number 1, is inflicting military damage the only way to push Russia toward diplomacy, as Zelensky suggests? Answer, it's not the only way, but it's currently the most effective tool Ukraine has. President Zelensky's strategy reflects a realpolitik view. Russia responds more to military setbacks than diplomatic overtures. History shows that Moscow often negotiates seriously only when under military or economic pressure. However, this does not exclude diplomacy. International isolation, economic sanctions, and internal political factors in Russia also shape its behavior. But absent battlefield leverage, Ukraine's bargaining power drops significantly. Question number 2, does Ukraine still hold the diplomatic and moral high ground among European allies? Answer, yes, but it's increasingly challenged. Ukraine continues to enjoy broad support, especially given the ongoing occupation of its territory and civilian suffering. However, war fatigue is growing in some European capitals, particularly where economic costs are mounting. Additionally, tactical decisions like deep strikes inside Russia or perceived intransigence at the negotiating table could gradually erode that moral edge, especially if peace seems elusive. Still, Russia's initial aggression and conduct largely keep Ukraine in a favorable diplomatic position. Question number 3, is this approach different from that of the Trump administration, which sought better relations with Moscow instead? Answer, yes, significantly. The current approach is confrontational and coalition-driven, while the Trump-era policy was more transactional and focused on bilateral diplomacy with Moscow, often at the expense of Ukrainian interests. Trump's administration emphasized resetting ties with Russia, sometimes undermining NATO cohesion. In contrast, Zelensky's strategy aligns closely with the Biden-era approach. Maintain pressure, strengthen alliances, and use military resilience to shape the diplomatic outcome. Question number 4, is there alignment among European allies in seeing Russia's losses as necessary to push peace forward? Answer, there is general alignment, but it's not unanimous or static. Most European governments agree that Russia must feel consequences, military, economic, and diplomatic, for aggression. However, differences exist. Eastern European and Nordic countries are more hawkish, while France, Germany, and some southern European nations are more open to diplomacy and wary of indefinite conflict. As the war drags on, political shifts and economic pressure could widen these cracks. For now, there's strategic consensus, but tactical patience is wearing thin in some capitals. Question number 5, What role does U.S. support, especially through proposed bipartisan sanctions legislation, play in altering Putin's calculations? Answer: a critical one. U.S. support is the backbone of Ukraine's war effort and diplomatic leverage. Bipartisan sanctions, if passed, would send a powerful signal of long-term resolve, regardless of administration changes. This constrains Putin's hopes of waiting out the West and may limit his diplomatic options or push him toward calculated compromises. Furthermore, U.S. unity encourages European cohesion and deters other actors, like China or Iran, from fully backing Russia. Without American support, the entire diplomatic military equation shifts dramatically in Russia's favor. Broader impact and long-term considerations. Question number 1. Could this operation be considered Russia's Pearl Harbor, as some commentators suggest? Answer: only metaphorically, and even then, it's a stretch. Comparing Ukraine's drone strikes to Pearl Harbor may capture the psychological shock felt inside Russia, especially with attacks deep into its territory. But unlike Pearl Harbor, this isn't a sudden entry into war. Russia initiated the conflict and has been the primary aggressor. However, for the Russian public and elite, these strikes may mark a turning point, shattering the illusion of homeland invulnerability. So while not equivalent in scale or strategic surprise, the comparison reflects a growing sense of vulnerability inside Russia. Question number 2, is Russia now being forced to consider the long-term cost of the war, both in material and morale? Answer: yes, this is becoming increasingly unavoidable. Russia is facing significant military attrition, especially in artillery, armored vehicles, and aircraft. At the same time, domestic morale is under strain. Despite censorship, rising casualties and economic stagnation are hard to hide. Elite circles are reportedly frustrated by the war's costs and international isolation. Although Putin still controls the narrative, long-term sustainability is clearly a concern, especially with strikes hitting key logistics and symbolic targets. Question number 3, can Putin continue this war indefinitely, especially when relying on allies like North Korea for manpower? Answer: not indefinitely, but longer than the West may hope. Putin has shown resilience and adaptability, relying on authoritarian tools, resource exports, and partnerships with Iran, North Korea, and China to keep going. However, importing manpower and munitions from North Korea reveals serious strain. It suggests Russia's industrial base alone can't meet military demands. Over time, reliance on marginal allies makes the war effort less sustainable, especially as battlefield losses mount and economic pressures deepen. But without decisive setbacks or domestic unrest, Moscow can likely drag this out for years, albeit at a diminishing return. Question number 4, how replaceable are the destroyed Russian aircraft, given that many are Soviet-era and expensive? Answer: they're not easily replaceable, and that's a major problem for Russia. Much of Russia's air fleet consists of Soviet-era aircraft or platforms upgraded from that era. Producing modern replacements is slow and costly, hampered by sanctions and loss of Western components. Every aircraft lost, especially advanced fighters or surveillance assets, is a long-term capability loss. Russia can try to ramp up production, but industrial bottlenecks and limited foreign tech access mean that rebuilding will be very slow. Question number 5, does the use of inexpensive but effective Ukrainian drones reshape how modern wars will be fought? Answer: absolutely, this is already a game changer. Ukraine has shown that cheap, commercially adapted drones can destroy expensive traditional platforms and infrastructure. This has reshaped the cost-benefit dynamics of warfare, favoring agility, innovation, and asymmetric tactics over brute force. It forces militaries worldwide to rethink air defense, logistics, and battlefield transparency. We're likely seeing a transition toward a future where drones, AI, and distributed systems dominate, especially in mid-scale and proxy conflicts. In the end, these questions, tactical, strategic, political, and philosophical, will define the next phase of the conflict. The Ukrainian drone operation, now dubbed Operation Spiderweb, is more than a military maneuver. It's a message to the Kremlin and the world. Whether it shifts the trajectory of the war or peace talks remains to be seen. But one thing is clear: the rules of warfare are evolving, and so is Ukraine's role in the global security conversation.